Is it working now? Oh my goodness. The joys of being live. The joys of being live straight off the top. So thank you for commenting. We can't hear you. Muted Kim might be better than regular Kim. So we'll have to see. You'll be the judge of that. But it's still good to see you. If you're new here, as I was explaining, although no one could hear me, the chat is sort of a fun place to be at. That is where you get to lean in and share your own goodness, experiences, things that you learned, things that you think are interesting or that we should know about, because sharing is caring. So we don't want you to keep that all to yourself. So Ahmed, it is so good to see you, and Rachel and Liz and Jeff and Janelle and Mustafa. Man, so happy you guys could all make it today. I know you're busy, so I deeply, deeply appreciate it. If you have questions as we go, ask them, or else I will monopolize this whole time and ask Doug my million questions, which, don't get me wrong, they're endless. But I don't know if you and I have the same questions. So if we don't, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you are listening to this later as you walk the dog or fold the laundry or listen to this on your favorite podcast network, that's okay. You can still ask questions too. You can message me or Doug or write on our LinkedIns, snail mail, whatever works, smoke signals. I don't know how you get your messages out these days, but we are happy to answer them. I'm so stoked about today's session, especially because it is really important for me to always be learning. And I think that I'm like you, or I know Darius is like this as well, or Liz, that, you know, we're always trying to stay a little bit ahead of the curve as much as we can. We're not necessarily going to be the very first early adopters of something, but we like to think if there's something new, we're going to poke our heads around and we're going to check it out a little bit. So as I do, as I'm wandering the internets, I was really digging into AI software. I'm kind of, you know me, I'm sort of constantly trying to see what's cool, what's new, how I can be utilizing it better, what I can be doing better. And I feel like I'm utilizing it a lot in my personal life. So asking ChatGPT to help me think of Mother's Day gifts, or asking ChatGPT to like pull up an itinerary for a friend's birthday party and what we could do that night. I feel like that kind of check, I feel like I'm using it pretty strongly, but I was wandering around the interwebs really looking for a way to use it in my business. So in a work setting. And as one does, of course, the algorithms and the AI know me and know that that's what I'm looking for. So they fed me up an amazing course that I just kind of gobbled up. And it was really focused around kind of everyday AI business tools. And it was taught by a lovely guy, Doug. So then I went down the rabbit hole of Doug, because that's what I do. I go down rabbit holes. And as I was going down the rabbit hole of Doug, I realized, holy moly, this guy is a freaking wealth of information. He has not one, not two, not three, 28. Yeah, 28, not 2 plus 8. That'd be 10. No, 28 courses on LinkedIn. He, you know, teaches Fortune 500 companies and individuals like management professionals and CEOs all about being agile, leading change, AI, technology training. So then I just went down the rabbit hole and started consuming a bunch of his other stuff. And then I realized, well, if I'm so into this and I feel like it's really interesting, then the chances are you would also think it was really interesting, because I feel like you and I have very similar tastes. So without further ado, do your own Google stalking in your own time, because we're going to get right into it. But please help me raise a cup of your favorite source of caffeine and welcome Doug to our coffee chat.
Thank you, Kim. Wow, that was the best setup ever. I'm just going to record. Yeah. Anytime I do a presentation in the future, I'm just going to record that segment and have people watch it.
Well, I mean, it was hard to pick what things to focus on, because holy moly, Doug, you have done so many things. I mean, the clients that you've worked with, teaching courses at like University of Chicago and Syracuse. I mean, you've been a busy bee.
Yes. I'm also pretty old too. So, you know, the more time you have, you can get more stuff in there. So,
well, as the
it's
late great Jimmy Buffett said, you can grow old, you just can't grow up.
yes,
That's the only rule.
yes. Unfortunately, I did both. And so
Oh
terrific. Well, thank
no.
you very much for having me. And sorry about all the rescheduling and things like that. You've been very great.
Well, we are
Yeah,
super
okay.
excited to have you because I just feel like AI is such a hot topic right now. And I'm sure you are talking about it all day, every day. And I'm
Yeah.
curious for you when it first started to become, I guess, more popular for us normal people, because you've known about it forever, but us normal people, did you just feel like, oh my gosh, like it's a world that people have not yet fully explored because you've been in it for so many years?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of surprised because I did my first LinkedIn learning courses on AI, I think 8 years ago. And they were there and they were, they did well, but they were sort of just because it was something I was interested in, something I studied in grad school. And then of course with generative AI, OpenAI started releasing these Dolly 2 and things like that. And I was actually developing my intro to AI course as that stuff was coming out. And so I released it, but I only put kind of a tiny bit of generative AI stuff in the very first version. Um, and then this whole kind of generative AI, this has been a huge step forward, like these foundation models or what some people call frontier models have been a massive kind of leap forward in AI, which has brought in a huge number of people. And actually my first two AI courses were in the library so long they retired them. And so I just have some new courses that came in its place.
That is amazing. And I feel like you've got some super fans of your own who's joining us today.
Okay.
Anish says, hello, Doug. Your course
Anish.
is phenomenal. Couldn't
Yes.
agree more. So I'm curious. I mean, obviously then if you've had courses that are old enough to be retired on the platform, then obviously, this is something that you've really been on the cutting edge of. And how I found you, how I kind of talked a little bit in the beginning, how I really found you because I was trying to use AI more in my business. I feel like a lot of the things that we're hearing about when it comes to AI is like, help it plan the perfect travel itinerary or help it optimize like your grocery list or a recipe. But I feel like you've been really focused on the business aspect of it. And I'm curious for you because you've worked with companies as well as individuals. What do you think are the key differences, or where do you see AI playing in both fields, like both as an individual, whether you're an entrepreneur or a consultant or a freelancer, when it comes to using AI in your business versus you're working at a corporate organization, you're on a sales team, you're on a marketing team?
Well, the way I would think about it is I would kind of divide it. My original courses were on predictive AI, which is kind of the bread and butter for how businesses make money off of artificial intelligence. Like you said, when you started using it, these systems knew everything about you, and that's what predictive AI was all about. It was about predicting what your customers will do next. If someone sneezes, then a tissue is already the system hands them a tissue. And there's a huge amount of value in that for companies, obviously, because they can advertise to people. If you buy a couple of things, it can predict what are you going to buy next. It can predict whether or not you'll repay a loan. So those have really been kind of key. Businesses already get immediate value from them. And then generative AI has kind of almost been like the iPhone, where sorry, a lot of people started using it at home and they loved it at home. And now the businesses are kind of starting to say, okay, well, these generative AI tools, people are becoming so familiar with them, we're going to start using them a little bit more at work. It almost seems like to me that people just started using these for their personal tasks and they became familiar with it immediately. And now businesses are starting to kind of say, okay, well, it's plugged into Microsoft Word, it's plugged into Excel, it's got Copilot and things like that. So So I don't know if I see a divide as much in generative AI between personal and business as there is with predictive AI, which is almost entirely business. So as people become more familiar with these tools at home to make muffin recipes and whatever, then they start to use them to write their office memos or respond to email and things like that.
I'm super curious about what your thoughts are on sort of the sensitivity of what you're putting into AI. So I'll give you an example. So I have a friend. I'm not going to give you details because it'll give away who she is, but she works at a corporate job and she works in marketing. And her corporate job basically said, in no uncertain terms, we don't want you using ChatGPT or any of this stuff with our data. So like what our returning customers are, our average spend, et cetera, because we don't want that information going to OpenAI. Now, my friend was kind of like, who cares? It's going to like help me do my job better. I want to put in, kind of the problem that I'm dealing with. She was thinking about like email open rates and all that sort of stuff. But, obviously you're deep into this space. What do you think about the privacy element of what we're putting into these platforms and what they are then learning, not necessarily even about us? Like, I don't care if you know what's in my, refrigerator for dinner tonight, but maybe my company cares what data you're putting into the platform about the company metrics.
Yeah, that's that's kind of like the difference between these systems and like Google. So we're used to that with Google, right? So they're constantly, you go to websites, they're constantly vacuuming up information about you. But these systems are different. They use something called a foundation model. Some people call them frontier models. And so what these are is they're basically, these systems required an enormous amount of graphic. That's why NVIDIA has gone crazy the last year or so, is they require these enormously powerful graphics cards to kind of go out in the world and vacuum up all the world's data. And then once it's vacuumed up everything, it creates this massive model of everything. And then once you're interacting with it, the data is already in there. In fact, it's actually a big technical challenge because since it's such a huge effort to create these massive models, that if you ask it something like, there's a lot of sports fans out there, if you say, hey, what happened with this game yesterday? The model doesn't know that yet because it vacuumed up all this data 6 months ago. So there's these newer technologies called RAG and other things, and fine-tuning your model to try and get that data in there. But it's not like this kind of thing where it might seem like you're having a conversation with a human, where you and I are talking and you tell me something about yourself and I know it. And then 2 weeks later, you say, hey, Doug. And I'm like, hey, that was a great conversation we had. These models are not like that. It's like you and I can have this conversation. I'll be talking within the context window. And then if you bump into me in 2 weeks, you're like, hey, Doug. I'm like, who are you? That's how these models work. They don't really sort of absorb, this kind of, even though it seems like you're having a conversation with a human, you're not. You're kind of having a conversation with a system that was trained 6 months ago. And it keeps information within a context window. But then as soon as that context window closes, it doesn't really keep that data. So, but that being said, it does also record the conversations, which it might feed into the model later, but, 6 months or something like that. But it's not like a conversation like you have with a human where you're like constantly learning from each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I also think that, one of the things, and I'm glad Darius mentioned it here, that I know a lot of people are very excited about when it comes to these models, and to your point of aggregating a ton of data points and knowledge, is the medical field. So saying, instead of just going to my doctor who's in Austin, Texas, and I'm kind of relying on everything that's within his knowledge base of, what is this, pink dot on my forehead, I might be able to utilize thousands of doctors, and they might be all over the world, and they might be able to help me figure out what this pink dot is. But at the same time, realizing, Darius is saying with him, patient information, medical stuff, billing, coding, that would be kind of a huge no-no. I'm curious what your thoughts are when it comes to the medical field. I guess both the good and the bad when it comes to AI.
Oh, I think that they'll probably try to anonymize that data and then vacuum it all up. That's almost certainly happening already. And I think that, there'll be, people will start to see the power in these systems, and they'll be less concerned with privacy, I think, as things move forward. I'm like, I try to keep my own medical information in my own personal database. So I'm not like one of those sort of Zuckerberg types that's just like, oh, there's no such thing as privacy. But I think our privacy is a legal construct, and there's the key part of privacy is the expectation of privacy, is what they used to call it. And so I think our expectation of privacy will change as time goes on. So there's almost all this data that you can imagine. It's not going to be to the point where I think you can go to like ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, give me a list of Doug's medical issues that he's had for the last 20 years. But it will be, it'll be anonymized. And so it'll have access to everything that happened to me. So those records will help diagnose people in the future.
Let's hope not, because with all my single friends, I could really see us doing some FBI investigative work on, who your ex-boyfriend is and who's that new guy you saw at Barry's boot camp class. Really just doing the in-depth detective work that right now is being done manually on Facebook and Instagram. But I think you made a really interesting point around our familiarity with it, because I can even remember way, way back, if anybody's joining and remembers dial-up, like the AOL days of like the doo-doo-doo, and you had to have a phone line and you had to dial up. I can remember my dad back then being like, Yahoo was the search engine. I'm really dating myself here, but it was like, don't put any of our personal information into Yahoo. Like, don't put our address. It was like this whereas now we put all kinds of things into Google. Like we're searching like rash on my leg, dark spot. I mean, stuff that you're like, I don't know if you want people to know about that rash. And so but to your point, like we've just become so familiar with Google, we don't think twice about it anymore. And it is interesting to think about what does that look like with these different platforms, whether it's, OpenAI or Claude or Gronk or any of these other things. It's interesting to think what that could look like, probably fairly quickly, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is already being digested. It's kind of like, it's I forgot the Dutch saying, but something like you can't put your finger in a dike, and so it's if there's like a hole in the dam or whatever, you can't plug it with your finger because it's all going to go over the top anyway. And so there is the amount of data that's being vacuumed up with these systems are far beyond what people would be comfortable with if they knew what they were. I mean, this whole thing now about Doge in federal government is, my wife keeps on saying, well, they're shutting down this, they're shutting down that. Why? And I keep on saying, well, no, this is ultimately just kind of a sleight of hand, that they're really after the data. And so the kind of data that they're getting from these systems, the kind of data that they're able to buy, the kind of data that they vacuumed up already, this is kind of, this avalanche or this flood, if I don't mix metaphors, of privacy violations is going to be so extreme that our people's expectations of privacy will have to shift. Now, again, like if I go to ChatGPT and I type in, hey, I have a rash on my leg, it's not interested in the data, oh, Doug has a rash on his leg. It's interested in, so how do I describe it? And what are some of the responses that it gives, and what responses are helpful? And it will record all of that, and that'll be useful to it. So because it knows that OpenAI knows that people won't use the system if I could just go in and just be like, someone could type in and say, hey, does Doug Rose have a rash on his leg? And it says yes, and this is what he's putting on it. So, but they don't need that data to be useful.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Obviously I feel like have this really unique position that you have been in these rooms, to quote the Hamilton play, you're in the room where it happens. You are with these Fortune 500 companies behind these doors with these executives, with these teams that, me or us may or may not ever be privy to. And so I want to ask a little bit of a nosy question, which is what are they talking about in those rooms when it comes to AI and business? Or what are you teaching them? Or what do you feel like they're really struggling with that maybe we here today or listening might be able to think about for ourselves or try to get ahead of ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm in smaller rooms, so it's not like Sam Altman and Satya Nadella and me are sitting around brainstorming over this. But in the rooms that I'm in it's about fear, really. It's not about, I think these companies are moving forward with it. They're not having conversations about ethics. They will eventually. But right now, it's not about that. It's about positioning yourself so that your company continues to be relevant. So most of the posturing that I see and most of the consulting is about kind of staving off panic, kind of where, how do we protect ourselves? Because there's a lot of businesses that could see themselves becoming irrelevant. I mean, if OpenAI is able to give you a pretty decent medical diagnosis, then a lot of businesses that do stuff like that are going to become irrelevant. And as these systems become larger and they vacuum up more data, then their capabilities will only increase. So most of the companies are mostly concerned about that. And it's a tough call because you're like, okay, am I going to license OpenAI, one of the, 03 or 03 or something like that from OpenAI, or am I going to try to build something on my own? But if I license it, it means that I'm just kind of like the cookie crust on top of their business. And so what happens if I just get blown away? So it's, that's kind of, I think if you're a Macintosh fan, it's called, what do they call it? They call it being Sherlocked, where basically your entire product disappears because a bigger company kind of comes up with that functionality. Because there used to be something called Sherlock, which you would keep on your Mac, which would search all your files for you. And then when they came out with Spotlight, it was completely irrelevant. And so they just their business disappeared. So I would say that the rooms that I'm in, companies are very concerned about being Sherlocked.
Yeah, I definitely feel like fear is one of those things that, at least from what I've seen, sort of goes hand in hand with AI. It seems like the minute somebody talks about one, the other one is not far trailing off. Yeah. I love this question from Liz, who is basically explaining, I use ChatGPT. I'm not fearful of it from that standpoint. Like I'm getting familiar with it. I'm using it. But I feel like I've been using it at a really basic level, a really sort of 101 level. What are 2 or 3 tips that you give to people that are sort of ready to take their usage to the next level, maybe especially in work or in business?
I think I'm a little biased here, but I think that the best thing to do is just to kind of understand what these systems are. My cousin just decided that she fired her therapist. Sorry, I just had my smoothies, so it's still stuck. Yeah. Smoothie with Doug, coffee with Kim, smoothie with Doug. And so so she's fired her therapist and she's using ChatGPT as her therapist. And I kind of tried to explain to her, I'm like, well, that's really not a very good idea. And she's like, no, it's the best therapist I've ever had. And I think and my cousin's great, and she's super smart and everything, but I think if she knew what the system was, she wouldn't use it as her therapist. And so I think the key is to understand what the system is. It's a large language model that's vacuumed up enormous amount of text data that looks for patterns in that data and then responds kind of word for word using statistics. And if you understand that, then you'll be better at using it. There'll be some questions that you ask that you'll get better responses from, and then other questions that you ask, which you'll be like, you're more likely to hallucinate. So understand what the system is. Don't think of it as like just a big brain in the cloud that you can access. And then once you see that, then you'll be like, okay, I understand what this is. I understand the kind of data it's trained on. And so here's how I should phrase my question to get the most out of it. So that's like the top thing I would do. And then the second stuff is, there's basic techniques for doing kind of this prompt engineering. I don't like that term because I don't think you're engineering, but just coming up with better prompts, just kind of like, there's some techniques you can do, but I think that as these systems get better, prompt engineering is going to be less relevant. And I think that as long as you sort of kind of see what's going on, if you have a sense of what's going on under the hood, then you'll know. Like if you had no idea what a blender was, you'd have no idea what to put into the carafe. I mean, you'd just be like, okay, should I put a sandwich in here? But since you know what it is and you know how it works, you know that it needs a little bit of liquid, it works best with frozen stuff, and you get more value out of it. So does that make sense?
What are one or two prompts that you're loving right now, or that you use, or frameworks that you tend to fall back on a lot?
I tend to not use large language models for anything human.
Okay.
So I tend to only use large language models to help me program and structure databases. And so
yeah,
I know that's not a common use case, but I don't. And then occasionally I'll use it for something like I have a studio where I record courses here. My son donated his walk-in closet. And so I needed to figure out how to mount a camera to a pole. And so they're great with doing stuff like that. So that's the kind of task I use it for. I don't typically ask it its opinion on things because it's just an aggregate of everybody's opinion. So it's not like an opinion. It's more like just kind of like consensus. So I tend to ask it very practical things like, how do I get to Marietta, Georgia? What's that? So, but then if you ask it something too factual, like what's the population of Marietta, Georgia, then you're more likely to get a hallucination. So I tend to have it do, it's very good at software development because it's trained on GitHub and enormous amounts of coding that people have done for 40 years. And it's very good at database design for similar reasons. But I don't really ask it human stuff, if that makes sense.
Totally. Well, and I feel like that the chat is having a lot of good conversations right now as well that I wanted to bring to the surface. One of which being that talks about new software, and as the new software is released, raising then the cost to consumers. And that with a lot of these models right now, a lot of these big platforms are making them free. So, they're free on Twitter, or it's free on Facebook, or free whatever it is, but that slowly as time goes on, it sort of reminds me a little bit, honestly, of Amazon. I feel like when Amazon first started, it didn't cost anything to be a part of it. And then slowly once, I don't know, like heroin or something, they got everybody addicted. They were like, the price of heroin's going up. Well, too late. You're already addicted. So now whether they're going to charge $9.99 for Prime or $10.99 for Prime, I'm in. I'm in and I'm hooked. And it's very hard to unhook me now. And so do you think that same sort of consumer behavior will happen with these AI models as well?
Yeah, I do. I think that there'll be kind of a very disruptive period. It's kind of reminds me, it's like Amazon. It's sort of like it's similar to I like your analogy, but I think it's more similar to Walmart because like Walmart went into these communities and closed all the small businesses. And yet, but then people who lived in those communities loved Walmart. And so they would like celebrate their arrival. There'd be like this, the parking lot would be full for the first week. But then by celebrating the arrival of Walmart, they were killing off their own jobs locally. And so I think that's kind of how it will turn out, is that people will really, really love these AI systems, but I do think that it will lead to a lot of job loss. I think that people who are in the industry kind of tend to just like hand wave that away, just like, you guys will be fine. But yes, it will be very disruptive. It will be, I grew up outside of Detroit, and, they always used to talk about, when the manufacturing jobs left Detroit, they always used to talk about how, we're just going to retrain everybody, and then everybody will be accountants, or everybody will be service industry. And that sort of never happened in that area. And I think that's kind of what's going to happen here, is that there's going to be kind of a massive hollowing out of people who typically would not be in danger of losing their job. And I don't think that I think those people will be worse off by this technology. But at the same time, I also think they'll be avid consumers of this technology. And so it'll be like the Walmart effect, where everybody's celebrating each new model, but at the same time, they're sort of, they're kind of consuming themselves to death, which is kind of like what happened in these Walmart areas. And so it's hard, because it's hard to tell people, well, you shouldn't use these because it's going to harm kind of like your own job prospects. But at the same time, people love shopping at Walmart. And so you just kind of end up in this kind of strange kind of dichotomy. But I think that's almost certainly what's going to happen.
No, I love the Walmart example, because you're so right. It's the people that will kind of stand on a hill and talk about, shop small and small business are the same ones that are going to Walmart and Target on the weekends. And you're kind of like, wait a minute. And then when you say to them, well, why aren't you shopping small? It's like, oh, well, that boutique downtown is so expensive.
Yeah.
So then you're in this loop. You're in this loop that is sort of unwinnable in that way. But you're right. And Craig was also adding in the chat that you're right. The amount of software that is being released, it feels like every 2 weeks, I'm hearing about either a new update or a new model or a new something that I never heard of. It was actually just last week, I had only really heard from a general standpoint of like ChatGPT and Claude. And my husband was like, no, Grok. And I guess that just got instilled in Twitter. It's somehow like, yeah. And then I just saw yesterday that Meta now has one on Facebook that is like proprietary to them. So I agree with Craig. It seems like all of a sudden we're in this like flood of different models all the time.
Yes. I would, and this is what I would do is, there's kind of two buckets. There's like the models, which are essentially data, and then there's software, which the models can help generate. And so, we're gonna absolutely see an avalanche of software as it's generated by the models. And it's sort of like, it's funny because my son, I went to a theater school in high school, and my son sort of kind of picked up the mantle, and so he's way into theater. And his friends are always making fun of him because they're like, oh, look at you, you're going to be a playwright. And then, how are you you're never going to be able to pay for rent anywhere. And then my son's like, well, what are you guys going to do? And they're like, software development. And my son comes home and he tells me that. And I'm just like, trust me, you're way better off doing theater than software development, than being a 16-year-old who's interested in software development, because these jobs are just going to be, the software development jobs are going to be hollowed out. There's going to be it's going to be a lot more difficult to become a junior software developer, because these models already produce software that's as good as now. Senior developers and everything, they'll be fine, but it's going to be hard to get in because you're going to be competing with these systems, and these systems cost $20 a month. So it's an interesting. So there is going to be just an avalanche of software coming out as these systems just start to kind of produce it on their own. As more and more of it is automated, it's just going to be like churning it out. So it might increase demand for more software, but I don't see that happening. I mean, people aren't going to have like 250 apps on their phone. Not even my sister has that many. And so there is, I think, kind of a hard limit to the amount of software people need. And I don't think that there's a limit on how much of it can be developed by AI.
No, I mean, definitely. I love this point that you kind of brought up about what jobs maybe are not going to be as interesting going into the future, software development being one of them, because I always like to think about, looking at the past. Yeah. As the computers rose, you felt like you needed typewriters less. It wouldn't be good in that day and age to go try to become like a junior assistant learning on a typewriter.
Exactly.
Probably your days were limited with the typewriter. So I totally agree with you on that one. I feel like this is such a juicy question from Anish, and maybe a little spicy as well, which is, what do you think about AI when it comes to government and how government uses it or leverages it or has access to it? Curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually it's very current. Like as a lot of this data is already being used to train models. And I would imagine on some level, there'll be pieces of it people like. Because a lot of stuff will be automated. And so if you think about things that when you interact with the government, a lot of the times, depending on how complex the task is, it could take a while. And that's not a bad thing. The government is heavily regulated because no one wants to be whatever, a senator or a rep or whatever, and then find out, like, have to answer questions about how $200 million went somewhere or whatever, Solyndra or whatever. These whenever the government screws something up, there's enormous consequences politically for it. And so everyone's so scared of screwing up the government that they create this in kind of like this regulatory apparatus. And so AI will kind of help with that, will help sort of with going through some fairly onerous regulations. I think that people are concerned justifiably that AI will be mixed with surveillance and used as a way to sort of create this kind of techno-fascist state, which kind of some Silicon Valley personalities have been getting very close to extolling the virtues of. And so I think people probably should be a little nervous about that, but my guess is that that's not the kind of thing that people will accept. I don't think people would accept any kind of mass surveillance coupled with AI. But there'll certainly be some efforts in that direction. But I think at the beginning, it's sort of at the base level, there'll be mostly AI will be used to help people interact with government regulatory challenges a little bit more efficiently. That would be my guess.
Yeah. Well, I also have this theory, and it's funny that Tuyet kind of brought it up as well. But I've been telling people that kind of my own little take on this is that as AI and the functionality of chat bots and asking Delta Airlines a question or asking your Florida FPL lighting company like questions about your electric bill or whatever, that I think my personal take is that the new sort of status or the new sort of wealth will be when you actually get to interact with a human. Because if anybody has ever tried to call any of these services and it's like, press 2 for if you're a current customer, press 4 if you're in this county or whatever. You get like 10 minutes into this and you are just either incessantly pressing 0 because you're like, get me a person, or you're just, I literally hear my husband doing it all the time upstairs. He just, agent. He's like screaming agent into these things. And now it seems, I don't know, I'm curious of your take on this. Now it seems like whether it is travel or whether it is restaurants, that the new form of status is like, if you spend X amount on this airline or X amount at this restaurant or X amount at this car dealership, we will give you Bob, and we have a special number for Bob. And when you have a problem, you call Bob. And it's this sort of like, oh, well, I don't deal with the chatbot on that. I call Bob. And that to me seems like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? It just seems like so much has become, to Tuyet's point, like very automated, that it almost seems like a status symbol to get a human.
Yeah, I think that there'll be a division. There'll be low margin businesses which become very automated with AI. Someone came up that they said that they spent $99 a year for Microsoft Office. So, and that's great. But when I was in my 20s and buying Microsoft Office, it was like $350, and, something like that. And so, and I was not able to call Microsoft. So I think that's for some of the low margin businesses, you're going to absolutely go through an AI system because there's just not enough value in your business to justify, having you talk to what will increasingly be expensive humans. And so I do agree with you that there will be a division. My wife flies Delta all the time because she's a professor. And so when she calls, they answer on the first ring for a human. It doesn't matter if people are sleeping on the floor of the bathroom in the airport. She calls and they answer on the first ring because she's flown millions of miles with them. But I think that if you're like, if you just buy whatever ticket's the cheapest, if you go Spirit, Allegiant, Delta, whatever, then you're going to go through an automated system. But on the upside, though, is these automated systems will be very, very good. And they'll be able to pull out information, and you won't have like this kind of thing where you're on hold with a human and they're chatting with somebody. You're on hold with a human in, wherever, like in Budapest, and they have to chat with somebody back in sort of San Diego, and then they get back on the phone with you and they answer your question, then you ask a follow-up question, and then they go back and chat with someone in San Diego. So the AI systems will be better than that. So people in some ways for these low margin businesses will be, I think will probably prefer chatting with an AI agent. But I agree with you that they'll be kind of having a relationship with a human will be seen as a premium service.
Totally. And apologies, Hemant, if I'm saying your name incorrectly, you'll have to correct me. But Hemant is asking, Doug, which job do you think will remain untouched from AI?
I mean, I'm not sure what your interests are. Become a personal trainer. Become a stylist. Become a massage therapist. So things that are what they call high touch will be protected from automation. If your job can be automated with AI, then it's inevitable that it will be automated with AI. So I mean, there'll be pieces of it that remain, because even you and I create courses on LinkedIn, right? And so, I mean, they could certainly in a couple of years, they could create synthetic Dougs and synthetic Kims that won't need their hair done, won't need, in my case, a lot of makeup, so that can be done. And so the question will be then, will people want to watch a synthetic Doug or a synthetic Kim? Or is it sort of like, will they just be like, okay, well, this is silly. I'm just watching sort of like basically a synthetic thing. And so my guess is that people will prefer real Kim and real Doug to synthetic Doug and synthetic Kim, but it will be, technologically, it could be done. And so those are the kind of things you have to think about with everybody's job. If it can be automated, and then if it will be automated. So it's kind of a two-step analysis.
No, 1,000%. My friend Cody and I talk about this all the time. Shelby mentioned a plumber, but we talk about how there's going to be this resurgence of, what was known as blue collar jobs. Your plumber, your electrician, your handyman, welding, all these things that, like, up until this point, like, the AIs are not welding anything. The AIs are not going to come fix a leak. They're not going to come and repair a broken doorknob in your house. So really kind of the jobs that require your hands, or the jobs that are not done on our computers, might be some of the most AI proof that there is at this point.
Yeah. And it's kind of was like a head fake too, because for years, at least when I grew up, everybody's like, oh, get a knowledge worker job, get a knowledge worker job. And then, everybody got knowledge worker jobs, and they're like, those are the ones that are now sort of right in the Venn diagram of being able to be automated.
Exactly.
No fake Kims.
No fake Kims, no anti-avatar. It's funny. A lot of people in the chat are definitely saying that they prefer real people over, to your point, these sort of synthetic or computer generated versions of people as well, which I think is so true. But Doug, like, around these parts, as I kind of said, although I was on mute, so I don't know if anybody heard me, but we tend to love learning. We tend to love, like, nerding out on things and going down rabbit holes of subjects that interest us. And if you could give us a homework assignment to do the rest of this week or going into this weekend when it comes to AI, could be to do something, could be to listen to something, it could be to download something, could be to watch something. What is a homework assignment that you would give us that you feel like would help us get in a better place or more familiar with AI?
Well, yes, my homework assignment, if I could assign it, would be to sort of to understand what it is. I see so much of that, and it's people sort of just kind of don't really, it was a very strange thing, because I hadn't seen this before sort of as a technology person, is that people just kind of used it, but they didn't really kind of think about what it was in any way. They were just like, I remember I talked to people, I talked to my niece about it, who was using it to help her come up with ideas to write a research paper. And she just kind of described it as this big kind of brain in the internet. And so I just, to understand how it's made, what it is, it will help you use it better. There's some really interesting, this might be a little heavy, but the Stanford Human Computing Group has a good description of how large language models and foundation models are created. I mean, I would go through, try to understand as much of that as you can. It's, it's thick. And so, and don't use AI to summarize it, because they tend to sort of gloss over key points. But that would be the thing I would focus on, is that if you get a sense of how it's made, then you have a much better sense of what it can do. Right now, people just kind of think of it as sort of like a therapist or a brain, or sort of like some kind of like consciousness or something like that. And it's just, and so they are either elated with it or disappointed by it. Like, I talk to people who talk to ChatGPT on their way to work. And I'm just like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. It's sort of like, it's like almost like talking to a Wikipedia page. But, so I think that if people kind of get a better sense of what these are, then you can extract more value from it.
No, that's a great homework assignment for all of us. And I will add on to that homework assignment that if anybody, wants to go down the Doug rabbit hole like I did, a good place to start would be Everyday AI Business Tools, his course on LinkedIn Learning. I found it super interesting. So for anybody that wants a gateway into Doug's universe, that would be my recommendation for a good place for you to start. But Doug, where can people keep learning from you, find more of the expertise that you put out into the world?
I'm pretty brand loyal when it comes to LinkedIn. I don't have any other social media. I don't belong to X or Facebook or anything like that. So that's, or YouTube. Actually, I have some courses on YouTube that just point to my LinkedIn courses. So I'm pretty much only on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in my material, then that's where you'll find. I have a newsletter as well, and so, but it's so that's where my stuff is mostly.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much. I feel bad we couldn't get to all the questions. We tried. Doug and I tried as much as possible, but you can always feel free to message us any questions that you have. Thank you guys for taking the time to be with us today. Doug and I know that you are super busy, so the fact that you hung tough for 45 minutes and dove into all things AI with us, we really appreciate it. And Doug, thank you for taking time to be with us today. We really appreciate it as well.
I appreciate it. I just wanted to just one little thing, because I saw I have this thing you gave me. There's some comments flowing by. I saw a flow of them. I have a very optimistic view of the future. And so people think that I'm like, that we're just down on it. I have a very optimistic view of the future here, but we are going to go through a disruptive period. And so better to prepare for it. But these tools, people will love them. It's try to understand them. Don't be afraid of them. And you'll get the most value from them. But it's long-term, it's going to be an amazing technology for humans, for the planet and things like that, as long as they can get the energy costs lower. But there will be a bit of a speed bump to get there. I mean, a little bit like massive speed bump, but
yeah, I was about to say it's never smooth. It's never smooth sailing at all, but especially when it comes to this, I think we're in for a bumpy ride. But you know what? Buckle up, Buttercup. That's why we're here. We're not here for smooth sailing. We're here to weather the storm and ride the waves and surf through the chaos. So I'm glad that we can do that. I'm glad that we can do that here together, which is why we meet here every single Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you want to keep joining, we have amazing guests just like Doug join us every single week. You can go to getcoffeewithkim.com and we will send you a magical little calendar invite that holds it. If you are busy on Wednesdays, I don't know what you're doing, but for some reason you're not able to join us, you can find this podcast on any of your favorite podcast networks, whether that's Spotify or Apple or Overcast, whatever it is. So it was so great to see you. Thanks for joining. And Doug and I really appreciate it. And have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, people.